Way back in the Stone Age, people were not able to stream their favorite shows whenever they wanted. There was no Tubi. There was no Freevee. There wasn't even a YouTube TV.
People would gather around the television like cavemen seeing fire for the first time just to watch whatever was played for them.
Whether it was an old episode of Scooby-Doo or the breaking news of a presidential assassination, they just sat there, illuminated by the light of the television, jaws agape in wonder.
These more primitive people were also not yet used to the possibility that two shows they watched could ever exist in the same universe. Nowadays, after nearly 2 decades of a world with Marvel movies, multiverses, and Fortnite collabs, the concept of two intellectual properties doing a crossover event has been so exhausted it nearly happens every week. Did you see that the Skrull from Far From Home was in Secret Invasion?
What? Did you hear that Star Wars was in Fortnite again? Did you hear that Star Wars was in Destiny? Did you see that you can spend $20 in Fortnite to get an Avatar The Last Airbender skin? Did you see that you can spend $40 in Overwatch for an Avatar The Last Airbender skin? But on the decades-long path to full commodification of crossover events, there was something much smaller and more novelty that would happen on television maybe once a year instead of once a week. These events were
crossover episodes. What the fuck is up, chat? How we doing?
I feel like we were clearly going to say it. Then you
sorry, I just thought maybe I could say something or.
Okay, well you don't seem sorry, so.
I said I'm sorry though, but okay.
You can go.
Our childhood was full of these events meant for kids. The Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana, and I Party with Victorious. But now that we're pushing 30,
woof,
we've watched the scales tip on the use of crossovers.
So we wanted to go back and watch through as many of these episodes as possible from the beginning to see how they became such a staple in media. And if we somehow miss your favorite, just know it was on purpose.
It was to spite you.
Determining what technically counts as the first crossover is something we'd leave up to historians rather than two community college educated twin YouTubers. Do Greek and Norse gods and demigods showing up in ancient myths count as a crossover? Maybe. One time when I was at a movie theater seeing The Last Doctor Strange, someone loudly gasped when Strange's cape entered a scene for the first time. And I don't think Hercules' sandal got the same type of reaction back in the day. But what we all understand to be a modern crossover seems to have popped up in America in the 1940s.
With Marvel movies like The Avengers being the biggest spark in crossovers of our current culture, it's only fitting that the crossover events in the 40s were taking place in two forms of media, comics and movies.
On June 1st, 1940, Marvel, known at the time as Timely Comics, released Marvel Mystery Comics number 8. It seems to be the first crossover event with two individually known characters in fiction meeting in one story. In this issue, the still very beloved and relevant Submariner faces off against the Human Torch. Around this time, Universal's monster movies were a staple in Hollywood. Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Invisible Man, and Dracula ruled Hollywood with an iron fang. This was a foreign time to us current moviegoers. Studios were experiencing near unlimited power and entertainment due to unchecked capitalism, and decided that the most profitable thing to do would be to jam these characters into big crossover events. I mean, can you imagine?
So in 1943, Universal released Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
So comic books and movies had gotten a post-war America acclimated to the idea of a crossover event,
which created a hunger in audiences to see the same thing happen on what was becoming the new dominant space for media, the television.
The television was invented...
Skip forward.
Okay. When we started researching what TV episodes to watch first in the history of crossovers, multiple sources cited I Love Lucy, Season 6, Episode 13, Lucy and Superman. For those of you that don't know, I Love Lucy is a beloved sitcom from the 1950s. And at the same time I Love Lucy was airing, there was a television series for Superman called Adventures of Superman.
No, I don't believe it.
You will, Blinky, you will.
So going into this, we expected exactly what the title implied. An episode where Lucy meets the Superman character from Adventures of Superman.
But during the episode, as they were preparing for their child's birthday party, Lucy remembers that her husband Ricky has met Superman and can get him to appear at the party. However, she says Ricky met Superman in Hollywood. Later, Ricky calls to say that he spoke to Superman's secretary, and unfortunately, Superman would be flying on a plane to Terre Haute, Indiana on the day of the party, heavily implying to a adult audiences that they're talking about getting the actor who plays Superman. And if that's the case, it's not really a true crossover, is it?
So Lucy decides to dress up as Superman after already promising him for the party and gets stuck outside of the window on their apartment building. While she's outside, she misses the information that after a change of plans, Superman is showing up. And if you're thinking like, how would Superman enter a room full of children? Here you go.
You're gonna see your favorite television star. Look, Superman!
They have fucking pull-up bars for a stunt in their kitchen. Hey Superman, do you mind not blasting our kitchen shutter doors with your feet? Thanks. As the party continues, Lucy gets trapped outside in the rain, only to be noticed after all the children had left. Superman goes out to save her and is sure to hit a good old 1950s "your wife sucks" joke before bringing her in.
Of all the crazy things that you've done in the 15 years that we've been married, this is really...
Ricardo, you mean to say that you've been married to her for 15 years?
Yeah, 15 years!
And they call me Superman.
This got us thinking about whether or not this counted as the first TV crossover.
Sure, it's Lucy and Superman from their respective shows, but if it's just a cameo of the actor, does that count? What even is a crossover episode?
So we decided to come up with a few ways to categorize these episodes of television as we watch through them.
Let's talk about the most common, true crossovers. A true crossover is a television event where two or more TV shows combine their cast for a shared storyline. One cast can occupy another's universe, or they could both cross over to each other's universes, but the characters of the show can't just be the actors portraying them. It has to be one fictional cast meeting another. So in 1957, I Love Lucy sort of did a crossover. Kind of. But not really. But a little.
Between the 1940s and 1986, television crossovers were pretty dry while comics and movies were making it a staple in entertainment. Famous comedy duo Abbott and Costello had a series of comedy horror movies where they met each universal monster.
And in comics, I mean, come on. We don't really need to tell you about how prevalent crossovers are in comic books. They've been shoved down your throat for the last 16 years. Looking back, we kind of expected crossover episodes on television to follow these movie and comic trends. But as we searched the internet to find the first true TV crossover, there was a pretty big gap between the start of crossover movies and when the trend finally made it to television.
Our best guess is that TV was still very new back when the monster movie crossovers started, with a limited number of channels and a much smaller pool of fictional characters. Comic books and movies also didn't have to share a consumer space with the news and local programming.
So by the 1960s, the two forms of media had many of their own icons. Superman, Abbott and Costello, that one face on the moon, which makes it much easier to do a crossover, because if you don't have fictional characters that can meet each other, you can't do one. Duh.
Fucking dumbass.
Loser.
So it seems this type of television episode didn't really arrive in American living rooms until
the 1980s. Jazzercise.
Shopping malls.
Communism.
What's communism?
I don't know, but it's red, and that scares me. As far as we can tell, the first true crossover on TV came in 1982 when the show Magnum PI, which followed a private investigator in Hawaii, crossed over with Simon and Simon, a show about two brother private investigators in San Diego. And if you're thinking, wow, those shows sound very similar, Magnum PI only has one PI. Simon and Simon has two. Now we're saying this is the first true crossover on TV, even though there was technically a crossover series before this, which we will be mentioning in a second, but it's an animated comic book series that doesn't exactly feel like crossing over two TV shows that had nothing to do with each other.
In the crossover episode, Magnum is hired by a woman from LA who wants to sell a wooden statue of a Polynesian god, which is supposedly cursed. Simon and Simon arrive in LA looking to steal it. The brothers manage to take it from Magnum, only for him to chase them back to their hotel where he finds them with a dead body. They explain to him that they had to steal the statue back because it was actually stolen by the woman that hired Magnum, and they had been hired to get it back before the curse killed their client, which it did.
But the interesting thing is that the episode ends with Magnum catching the thief before she boards a plane back to LA with stolen money from the auction. That's the end of the episode. Or at least, that was the ending of the Magnum PI episode I bought on YouTube. On television in 1982, however, it was a two-part event. And if you watch the opening of the following Simon and Simon episode, it recaps the events of Magnum PI, but with a completely different ending.
Hold that
play.
Well, how about LA? Because this baby just left.
They arrive at the airport too late, so Simon and Simon have to chase her back to Los Angeles and continue the story from their show. So it seems like they created two endings for Magnum PI, one for the event and one for syndication and reruns so the audience wouldn't be left on a cliffhanger when they watch it out of context. Magnum PI also was part of the second true crossover on TV, doing a double episode event with Murder, She Wrote.
But the first big crossover event on television came in the form of TV animation. Back in the 1960s, Hanna-Barbera Productions was an animation powerhouse, creating some of the most iconic and influential animated shows of all time.
I should say though, while these shows and characters were huge for boomers and bled all the way into being part of our childhood, they have fallen out of relevance enough that virtually none of them have a Fortnite skin.
In Fortnite's September player survey, it actually mentions the name of characters from the show, and seeing as it's a mystery and kind of spooky type show, it would make perfect sense for Fortnite to collab with them for Halloween. So I made this concept using AI, where we could potentially get a Shaggy skin with a Mystery Van back bling, a Scooby-Doo skin with a Scooby Snacks back bling, and then I just threw in some random glide. This would be sick to see for Fortnitemares, and Epic actually have already considered it, so let me know what concept I should make next.
Just to put into perspective how current children feel about Bam Bam Flintstone or Yogi Bear.
And the original creators of the production company, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, had made Tom and Jerry in the 1940s for MGM.
Again, zero Fortnite skins among them, so how influential can they be, honestly?
In the 1970s, Hanna-Barbera produced Super Friends, an animated series based on the Justice League.
Finally, a show with Fortnite clout. Super Friends was an entire crossover series due to the fact that each hero already had their own individual animated show on TV. But does it really count as a crossover if it was already a crossover in comics and they're making a show of the comic book Justice League? Because Justice League is the crossover. Technically, they're just animating a crossover that already happened, rather than crossing over two things on television. Now, if we were to cover every animated comic book TV show or movie, this video would be 40 hours long. So just know that the entire time the rest of this is happening, comic book crossovers are happening on TV like all the time.
But decades after the Flintstones and the Jetsons had ended, Hanna-Barbera returned to many of their beloved television characters with a new limited series called Hanna-Barbera Superstars 10.
This was a collection of TV movies returning to the worlds of the old shows. The legacy of these TV movies really needs no explanation. Everyone remembers where they were when they first watched Yogi Bear and the Magical Flight of the Spruce Goose.
There are countless video essays on Top Cat and the Beverly Hills Cats.
And as is tradition, every 4th of July, kids across America come in from the pool, sit in front of the TV, and drool for Scooby-Doo Ghoul School. But perhaps the most significant event of all 10 was the very first major animation crossover event that wasn't one of those nerdy-ass comic books. The Jetsons meet the Flintstones.
Okay, so listen. The Flintstones and the Jetsons are two of the most influential TV shows and pieces of animation of all time. Both shows' premises run parallel to each other. Most of the comedy in the Flintstones comes from taking modern problems and aspects of the nuclear family and making Stone Age versions of them.
Instead of having a garbage disposal, they have a Pegasaurus disposal. Instead of a leather recliner bought at Sears and Roebuck, Fred bought a stone recliner at Sears and Roebuck.
How do you like it, George? Got it on sale at Sears and Roebuck.
By the way, Sears used to be called Sears and Roebuck, but they dropped the Roebuck Facebook style back in the 1950s. This TV movie came out in 1987. Real solid reference, guys. The Jetsons work in the same way, but make every aspect of nuclear family life an idealized future, where every problem is solved with a robotic gadget.
So in the TV movie, the Jetsons accidentally travel back in time to the town of Bedrock and spend over an hour trading comments about how different their lives and families are.
But there's not much to say because these are parallel families from the same creator. So while pointing out their differences, they realize that they're not so different after all. But like, we know that. Unlike comic books, movies like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, or Murder, She Wrote and Magnum PI, the Flintstones Meet the Jetsons were the first to create what we like to call the pointer crossover. One whose plot involves mashing two casts together and just filling time with pointing out how different each show is from the other. This really only makes the first viewing barely worth it because there's not much substance to the episode. Because like, if you watch both shows, you know how different they are. They're different shows.
The years and years of adult animation that were inspired by these shows also didn't help our viewing of this movie. In a world with 27 seasons of Family Guy and 200,000 seasons of The Simpsons, this special felt very slow and boring.
Yabba dabba doo? More like yabba dabba 2 thumbs down from these brothers. Come on, let's go watch Yogi Bear and the Magical Flight of the Spruce Goose.
We actually have a lot more to record. You should probably.
Yep, of course.
Heading into the 90s, comic books were far ahead of movies and TV with crossovers. Marvel had not only finished a run of Secret Wars, a multi-issue event that included the Avengers and the X-Men, they'd already done a sequel to it and finished the entire Infinity Gauntlet Infinity War saga.
TV would have a crossover episode here and there. In the mid-90s, there were a few that we could find. Fresh Prince did an episode where Will and his fiancée Lisa are urged by his Uncle Phil to take marriage counseling before their wedding, only to be in a counseling group with the Jeffersons.
There was also the NBC Blackout Thursday in November of 1994. NBC held an event where their 4 Thursday night sitcoms, Mad About You, Friends, Seinfeld, and some show called Madmen of the People, shared a side plot where a citywide blackout happens in New York. The idea was that a character in Mad About You would accidentally knock out the power, and then each show that followed would share the same power outage. The only problem was that Seinfeld flat out refused to participate, so there's an episode in the middle where there's just no blackout.
Now, Mad About You did originally have Lisa Kudrow as a character named Ursula, but Lisa Kudrow, of course, got cast as Phoebe in Friends. So they later decided to cross Ursula over into the show and do a Mad About You crossover where they met Phoebe. Ursula actually becomes a real character in Friends because, they made her the sister of one of the main characters. But as for the Blackout Night, none of the characters actually cross over into any of the other shows to our knowledge, but New York City is sort of a character of its own in each show. So confirming that they're in the same New York makes it count. And there's something, I don't know, kind of magical about that. New York City. This city, man. Ever since my parents paid for my NYU tuition, this place has been home. Ramen, tacos, all cultures are welcome here. And in the world of animation, 10 years after the Jetsons meet the Flintstones, Hanna-Barbera made another crossover, Bravo Doobie-Doo, an episode of Johnny Bravo where he meets Scooby-Doo and the Mystery Gang.
My car just broke down, and I was wondering if you guys could give me a lift.
Scooby-Doo actually continued to have a long history of crossover events throughout the years, but before we get to the rest, a quick word from the sponsor of this video.
Hi, I'm Tiny Tony, and I want to thank our big sponsor, Henson Shaving. Tiny Tony is so hairy, they almost call me Hairy Tony. Can you imagine? And that's why Henson Shaving's Henson Razor is super cool. Here's the thing, even the cheapest dollar store disposable razors will likely give you a reasonably smooth shave. The trick is in removing the hair without any negative outcomes to Tiny Tony's skin. Henson is on a mission to give Tiny Tony a skin-friendly, healthy shave. Henson makes their razors in an aerospace machine shop in Canada that also made parts for a Mars rover and the International Space Station. The Henson razor is made of aluminum, and its built-in 30-degree angle helps give the optimal cutting surface, and you can also recycle the blades. When Henson was looking at other razors, they noticed a consistent lack of blade support. The blades had too much bend or flex. Think of anything else you'd cut with. You wouldn't want the blade to be moving, you'd have less control. Tiny Tony doesn't want to mince garlic with some bendy ass knife, so why would he put a bendy razor to his tiny face? So visit hensonshaving.com/Burback and use code Burback to get 100 free blades with your purchase of a Henson razor. Just be sure to add them to your cart. Now back to the big video.
The Simpsons also had a crossover with The X-Files, where Mulder and Scully appeared. The X-Files has a lot of weird crossover connections, even sharing some characters with other TV shows. They even did a Cops crossover in 2004. Can you do a crossover with Cops? It's not a fictional show or franchise with characters. It's just nationally televising people during some of the worst moments of their lives, and disproportionately misrepresenting and sensationalizing crime in America. And fuck that TV show.
Kid shows also got in on the action in the 90s and early 2000s as well. The Ninja Turtles did a crossover with the Power Rangers, and in the summer of 2003, the Rugrats and the Wild Thornberrys, both from Klasky Chupo, we looked that up, that's how you pronounce it, met up in a full movie called Rugrats Go Wild.
Yes, this is technically a theatrical movie release, but it's a crossover of 2 television shows, and it's also really well animated and made with a lot of care, so it deserved a mention. But if there were a Mount Rushmore of TV crossovers for late millennials and early Gen Z, the first big crossover faces on that mountain would be delivered in 2004 by Nickelodeon's 2 Little Brunette Boys. The Jimmy Timmy Power Hour was a crossover event between boy genius Jimmy Neutron and Fairly Odd Parents' Timmy Turner.
This crossover was special for its very new and interesting challenge. With episodes like the Flintstones and Jetsons, Bravo Doobie-Doo, and movies like Rugrats Go Wild, crossovers were made easy by the fact that they were made by the same creators.
In Hanna-Barbera's case, to do a crossover, all they had to do was cross over the hallway into the next room. Jared, I said the crossover.
Yeah, I heard it right next to you.
With the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, however, it seems that Nickelodeon was just like, we have two animated boys named Jimmy and Timmy. I think they should meet. And I really like that. That's a fun reason to do something. Jimmy Neutron existed in a 3D animated television show. Made after the movie Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius was a hit for Nickelodeon in theaters. Fairly Odd Parents is a clearly 2D animated show with a completely different art style made by a completely different production company. The combination of these two makes it one of the most visually, let's say, interesting crossovers of all time. Rather than bringing Jimmy into Fairly Odd Parents for an episode or vice versa, the show uses Timmy's access to fairy magic and Jimmy's futuristic science brain to place each of them into each other's universe, art style and all. So rather than looking like this, Jimmy joins the 2D space pretty seamlessly as a Fairly Odd Parents design. Timmy looks very ugly. The animators were faithful to his art style when bringing him into Jimmy's universe, which gives him a more uncanny mouth and head compared to the other characters. He's just like too sharp and too flat. That being said, this one I think does deserve a little credit for at least combining and celebrating each animation style. But when we're talking about TV history, there's a very clear breakdown you can apply to see how significant a moment is. Basically, if it was before we were alive, it's sort of important. But if it was in this zone, there's a chance we watched it on summer break between the ages of 8 and 15, making it the most important thing to ever happen.
So one day in the summer of 2006, we're two 9-year-olds on the couch drinking Capri Sun when this plays on the Disney Channel.
It's the can't miss event, That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana.
Raven Baxter, that's me.
I'm Cody and this is Zach. I'm Maddie. Hey Maddie, you're Hannah Montana.
That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana found itself smack dab in the middle of Disney Channel's golden age. Just to set the scene of when this happened for older Gen Z and millennials out there. That's So Raven was in its final season. High School Musical had its premiere in January. Zach and Cody were on season 2. Hannah Montana had premiered a few months ago, and the first summer event of the Disney Channel games was airing all summer from June to August. There's an argument to be made that this was one of the best summers in children's TV history, but we will not be making that argument because we're almost 30.
Woof.
The whole event aired in one night in July of 2006 as a 3-episode event, but when we returned to watch it, we were surprised that it was much less of a crossover than we originally remembered. The first episode is an episode of That's So Raven that is almost completely normal other than the fact that the third act ends at the Boston Tipton, where she meets Mr. Mosby and the twins from Sweet Life. The second episode is technically part of Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. This one has Raven meeting the entire cast, but without anyone from her show. She's also barely in the episode other than the intro and the ending. Hannah Montana is nowhere to be seen in the first 2 episodes, until the last possible second where she shows up and everyone freaks out because she's so famous. The final part of the crossover falls in episode 12 of Hannah Montana season 1 and aired as the final episode of the night. The weird thing about this finale is it does not use a Hannah Montana episode to culminate a big climax between the 3 shows and all of its characters. You'd expect this one to be a Hannah-focused A-plot where maybe her dad and Jackson also come to the hotel and have a B-story with Zach, Cody, and Raven. But within the first 3 minutes of the episode, Miley just goes home.
In those first 3 minutes, Maddie arrives to her room to say goodbye and is starstruck by Miley's father, Robbie Ray. If you're counting, that is the 3rd time an in-universe celebrity has made one of the characters starstruck in this crossover. Now, if you're unaware, Hannah Montana is a very unique show when it comes to the family on screen and Miley's real life.
So in real life, Miley Cyrus's father, Billy Ray Cyrus, was a pretty popular country artist in the 90s. In the show, he plays Robbie Ray Stewart, basically an exact copy of himself with a different name. In the show, however, he manages his daughter Miley Stewart, who is secretly the mega famous pop star Hannah Montana, aka Miley Stewart in a blonde wig. Miley Cyrus, at the start of Hannah Montana the show, was not famous and was not a pop star. There's also many more people in the Cyrus family and a lot of sad drama, I think, but we're not getting into that because why the fuck would we? In the show, the family only includes Robbie Ray, Miley, and her 16-year-old brother Jackson, played by a man in his 30s. So now that we've got that covered, Maddie is starstruck by Robbie Ray and inadvertently makes Hannah/Miley feel guilty about the fact that he's given up his career as a country star to raise his children and is now continuing to give it up to manage her dreams. The funny thing is, Billy Ray in real life was definitely a name in country music, but not as big as Robbie Ray is portrayed in the show. His song Achy Breaky Heart is by far his biggest, and while he had somewhat popular albums and fans, he wasn't really a household name aside from that song. Or at least not a household name in houses without an F-150 with a Punisher bumper sticker in the driveway.
So while Robbie Billy Ray was giving up a life of fame and fortune to support his daughter's fame and fortune, Billy Ray was becoming much more famous than he'd ever been and allowing the TV show to spotlight his own music career while making his child famous. In fact, he had not given up his life as a musician at all. From the time Miley was born to the air date of this episode, July 28, 2006, Billy Ray Cyrus released 8 albums in a little over 13 years. He did seem to cut way back on doing shows while the kids were little, like Robbie Ray though.
So 4 minutes into the episode, we join the Stewarts back in Malibu. And it's just a regular episode of Hannah Montana centered around the kids trying to push Robbie into performing again. Which he does, but Jackson hates their babysitter so much they travel to San Francisco for his first of 5 shows to tell him to come home. At this show in San Francisco, Robbie Ray sings "I Want My Mullet Back," a real song by Billy Ray Cyrus that certainly made him money and royalties by having Disney license the song. Robbie Ray is so good on stage that the kids decide to not share how much they miss him until he gets an offer to tour with Toby Keith, and Miley immediately cries and runs off. Robbie decides once again that his kids are too important and that he'd pass on the tour. But it does seem that the night that this episode was airing, Billy Ray Cyrus was performing on stage. And if this source is correct, the amount of live shows he did exploded in 2006.
And nobody knows why.
I couldn't possibly know why Billy Ray's career started popping off in 2006.
Careers are weird like that.
They're so weird. Then at the very end of this 3-episode event, Maddie runs into the club in San Francisco. She's from Boston, by the way, and is chased off by their bodyguard. That's the crossover. That's how this big event between all 3 shows ends.
Hannah Montana as a show was a massive hit right off the bat, but it's hard to look at this crossover event as anything but Disney using their veteran star Raven and their other hit show Sweet Life to introduce the Disney Channel audience to their new star in her first season. This event was huge for us as kids and is the 16th most watched event in Disney Channel history, but it's tainted a bit when you realize it was also a tool to create their next child star, one who doesn't seem to have loved the experience.
And we're not saying that Disney is evil for using this to trick children into caring about Hannah Montana. It just seems like that was the primary focus for the episode rather than being a crossover event. It's actually much less of a crossover than examples like the Flintstones meet the Jetsons. That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana is mostly Raven solo entering the Sweet Life cast with a quick cameo from Hannah Montana. That being said, it's done in a much smarter way than most of the crossovers we watched. Each episode feels like it belongs to the show it exists in, while incorporating aspects of the other two.
It's actually very similar to how the old Magnum PI crossovers were structured in the 80s.
Raven's episode creates the situation by using the Boston Tipton as a backdrop for the final act, introducing her to Mosby and the twins. Zack and Cody's episode manages to use Raven's visions as a central plot point, with the B-plot of London and Maddie also hinging on Raven's love for design. Even though she isn't in the episode much, they managed to make a normal episode of Sweet Life center around Raven as a character. The final episode, however, doesn't seem to really even count as a crossover episode. Now, obviously, these aired as a trio. The event is a crossover, but falls in the middle of a different season of each show.
So if you're rewatching Hannah Montana or had it on DVD as a kid, there's an episode that just randomly starts in a Tipton room where Maddie makes Hannah feel bad and then appears at the end as a crazed fan.
The first 2 work as episodes of their own shows, but the crossover part to Hannah is more just a cameo. In children's television, after That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana and Jimmy Timmy, crossover episodes became a regular occurrence.
The iCarly crew met the Victorious cast in iParty with Victorious, where Sam, Carly, and Freddie sneak into a party in this horrifying set of makeup and prosthetics.
Jimmy and Timmy crossed over 2 more times over the next 2 years. Sweet Life and Hannah Montana found themselves in another 3-episode crossover event, Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana, a crossover between, you guessed it, Wizards of Waverly Place, Sweet Life on Deck, and Miley Stewart.
Oh my fucking god, dude, you said her name in front of
everybody.
Oh my god.
One of my favorite things about the Wizards crossover is that it not only confirms wizards are real in Sweet Life and Hannah Montana, it also does it for That's So Raven. Raven and Alex are walking around with superpowers. Zack and Cody, what's your power? Twins? Fucking losers? It's crazy that the canon now confirms magic and... You know what I just realized?
What?
None of this matters and none of it's real and it's all a bunch of kid shows.
But for the next decade and a half, there was a steady stream of crossover episodes, including the ones we just mentioned. Animation saw Lilo and Stitch with Kim Possible, the Recess Kids, and the Proud Family. Kids Next Door crossed over with Adventures of Billy and Mandy. The Simpsons and Family Guy did a crossover that starts off as a classic Pointer crossover, clearly inspired by the Jetsons meet the Flintstones, but slowly turned it into a meta episode addressing the criticism of both shows from their audiences.
Mostly the claim that Family Guy is a copy of The Simpsons Jetsons, one they address literally in court by having Fred Flintstone acknowledge that they're both copying his show. Sitcoms and dramas saw Brooklyn Nine-Nine and New Girl, Bones and Sleepy Hollow, and after the success of iCarly and Victorious, Nickelodeon began the series Sam and Cat, which from what we can find is the first and only crossover spin-off series, using two characters from two different shows that had crossed over in the past as co-stars in a brand new series. It'd be like if Joey also included Kramer from Seinfeld, or if Carl from Jimmy Neutron was in Joey. Or like if Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air moved into Joey's apartment.
But as we examined all of these crossovers, some didn't exactly fit into the true crossover definition. There was occasionally a special or two that was uniquely something else. One of these types of episodes was the Takeover episode. A Takeover episode is when the cast of one show replaces the cast of another franchise, moving through the story of said franchise with the tone and personalities of the Takeover cast. And for the most part, this is really just a Star Wars thing.
Under George Lucas, before the Disney acquisition, Lucasfilms allowed Family Guy and Robot Chicken to run their very own Star Wars episodes. Now, Robot Chicken's episodes aren't really takeover or crossover episodes. Robot Chicken as a series would parody a wide range of fictional characters and could do so because of parody law in the US. Their Star Wars specials do exactly what they sound like, focusing their parody sketches solely on Star Wars movies.
Huh? What do you mean they blew up the Death Star?
But what makes these specials interesting is that they had direct permission from George Lucas to do so. The same goes for the Family Guy episode. This means they were supplied with all sorts of official Star Wars materials in production, including visuals, sound effects, and music.
This was an absolute joy for everyone involved to be able to do this. Everyone on staff knows just about everything you've done almost verbatim. Your company was supportive from the start. Why are you guys so much nicer than everyone else?
Which, in Family Guy's case, creates a really interesting result. Parodies that follow the same general plot as the original source material tend to always result in a product that feels much cheaper. Spaceballs looks like a budget Star Wars. Epic Movie looks like a YouTube parody of Narnia. What's that? Nobody remembers Epic Movie?
Come here! Yeah!
Probably for the best.
But with all of the official materials provided, the quality of the Family Guy 3-episode event and Robot Chicken specials were pretty unheard of at the time for a parody episode. Only one of these two, however, feels like it counts as a Takeover episode. While the Robot Chicken Star Wars special is a series of sketches inspired by different moments in the trilogy, similar to the show's regular format, Family Guy's cast takes over the plot of all three films in a 3-episode event.
Peter is Han Solo, Lois is Leia, Brian is Chewbacca, Stewie is Darth Vader, Chris is Luke, Quagmire and Cleveland are C-3PO and R2-D2, Meg makes an appearance for a brief moment as a slimy monster in the trash compactor, and you get it. There's a ton of Family Guy characters replacing the cast of the originals.
These specials, for the most part, follow the storylines of the original trilogy almost beat for beat, obviously packing each scene full of Seth MacFarlane comedy. After having Disney pump out Star Wars content nearly every month, it's hard to look back and picture this being a huge event, but it absolutely was. Star Wars content was few and far between, so an official parody by one of the most popular shows on TV not only had great ratings, but was a massive DVD hit at sleepovers everywhere.
Hey, are you awake? I think your parents are up. When are you getting up?
7 years later, after that evil mouse stole Star Wars from George Lucas, leaving him with a measly $4 billion to figure out what he wanted to do next, a very similar special was produced, this one aimed at children. Phineas and Ferb Star Wars also, I guess, counts as a Takeover episode. The show's characters are mixed into the canon of the original films as if they were born in the universe. But what's interesting is that an animated version of the original cast still exists in the story.
Do you need help with your moisture evaporator? We can trick it out like ours.
I wish, but Uncle Owen wants to do things the old-fashioned way.
So it's not exactly a true crossover because it's not the Phineas and Ferb cast being transported to Star Wars by some wacky machine they made on summer break and then being wowed by the fact that Han can understand Chewbacca or something. Phineas and Ferb are dressed like Luke and sort of exist with and near him, but Luke's story plays out on the original track of A New Hope for the first half of the special. I think nothing illustrates the use of the two properties more than the reveal after the famous opening shot of the Star Destroyer. In this version, Doofenshmirtz Tower is just like rammed into the top of it. Speaking of Doofenshmirtz in the special, he sort of is Darth Vader, but there's a scene where he runs into the actual Darth Vader and is big-timed by him. I'd call it an along with episode, but that's not as catchy as lumping it in with other takeovers. And also, none of this really matters. Since this episode aired after Disney gained control of property, you can really see the difference in direction of how outside artists were able to use Star Wars once George relinquished control.
Lucasfilms under George cared deeply about holding up the integrity of the original films and its canon. canon. Well, except for when George himself was making personal artistic changes and refusing to show anyone on Earth versions of the originals without his insane CGI additions. The Robot Chicken and Family Guy specials were deeply rooted in moments from the original films, but about midway through the Phineas and Ferb special, the story becomes its own thing, making this like half A New Hope with the Phineas and Ferb cast and half a Phineas and Ferb episode that's themed with Star Wars. Ferb even becomes a Sith at one point and looks like Darth Maul. So for all the people who care about holding up Star Wars canon...
Number 1, you are correct. Darth Maul theming wouldn't be in A New Hope. And 2, stop caring about Star Wars canon. It doesn't matter anymore. There's like 50 Star Wars projects. Honestly, maybe it's getting older that makes me and my twin brother care less about Star Wars and what it means to culture. Maybe it's due to fatigue from the countless hours of slop Disney's churned out. But if we're being honest, it's probably just the fact that seasons 1 and 2 of Andor were so fucking good, it made the rest of Star Wars feel kind of stupid by comparison. And before you run to the comments and talk about how important the canon is and how Disney ruined everything, go watch Luthen's monologue in season 1, episode 10 of Andor, and then chase it with a clip of Cy Snoodles, George's CGI singer from Return of the Jedi.
So yeah, Takeover episodes seem to be mostly Star Wars unless we're forgetting something. What's up?
Nothing. By the 2010s, crossovers were really common. Phineas and Ferb Mission Marvel was more of a true crossover than their Star Wars one, with the cast in their regular lives meeting the Avengers. But some crossovers were kind of too weird to define, like in the show Community, where Abed, played by Danny Pudi, obsessively mentions the show Cougar Town only for him to be in the background of a scene in Cougar Town without any lines.
Or like in the show Mr. Robot, where Elliot, the main character, has a hallucination where he's in a version of the show Alf with characters from Mr. Robot. Now, is a dream sequence where Alf is in the episode a crossover? Probably not, but it's something, I guess. Now you might be asking, what about NCIS? What about CSI? What about the Chicago shows? What about Law & Order? Are you fucking serious? We will not be talking about those shows. Except for a character who was originally on the show Homicide and then made it over to Law & Order SVU. We're talking about the king of crossover cameos, Detective John Munch. Not only is he in a shit ton of these crime show episodes, the actor-comedian Richard Belzer, portraying John Munch, is credited as Detective John Munch in Law & Order Trial by Jury, Detective Munch in Arrested Development, John Munch in The Wire, Sergeant John Munch in 30 Rock. He appears on screen in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt and plays the voice of a detective in American Dad, making who we like to call the Munch the most prolific character in crossover history. As the volume of TV crossover episodes continued to grow heavier, the two mediums that had helped start it all would actually be the ones to tip the scales on how excited the public could get about crossover events. Movies like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Alien vs. Predator, and Freddy vs. Jason had already made crossovers of multiple franchises into an established genre. Comic books had already had several massive series crossover events with all of their characters, but a full marriage of the two was going to be one of the biggest moments in entertainment history.
After the explosive success of 2008's Iron Man, audiences were surprised to see Tony Stark appear in the post-credit scene of Edward Norton's Incredible Hulk movie, which was, quote, kind of a reboot and kind of a sequel to Ang Lee's 2003 movie Hulk.
We distinctly remember leaving Incredible Hulk as kids getting super excited at the possibility that there could be a much larger story at play with these films. And oh boy, we know the rest of the fucking story. Skip forward over a decade and nearly 20 Marvel movies. We had seen heroes from these films team up in the Avengers, team up against a robot in Avengers Age of Ultron, and seen them go through a breakup in Captain America Civil War. During this time, Marvel on Netflix had Daredevil crossover with Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, until they all crossed over to form a B-team Avengers called The Defenders. The CW also had their own DC universe on TV that your friend kept swearing was actually cool and you should totally watch, until they gave up on it a few seasons in themselves because they realized it was all kinda lame.
Barack Obama, it will almost be an honor to kill you.
But the excitement from worldwide crossovers was still building, because back in 2012, when the Avengers met for the first major comic book movie crossover ever, the post-credit scene suggested that they were building an even bigger story about fighting Thanos.
And after the bigger story concluded with Infinity War and Endgame in one of the biggest movie events in history, I think the idea of a crossover being a novelty was completely dead.
After years and years of cameos, crossovers, crossover skins, multiverses, and multiverses, it all just feels exhausting these days. We've moved to such a late stage of the entertainment business that it's no longer special to see two characters or casts from different stories interact. It's no longer even special to see a decade-long story webbed together across nearly 20 films. So for the majority of us, who gives a shit anymore? If anything is successful enough, it'll probably be crossed over into something at some point. Sure, it's not always in a story, but you best believe that if you create a recognizable character, they'll soon be flossing with Space Jam LeBron James, Mr. Beast, and Sabrina Carpenter next to Lonely Lodge.
It almost feels impossible to make a crossover feel like a fun event anymore without it being a clear cash grab by either one or two major companies. However, more recently there was one example of a good old-fashioned TV crossover just for the sake of doing it. That, if you're unaware, was the Abbott Elementary Always Sunny crossover.
After watching a ton of TV and movie crossovers spanning over decades of filmmaking, we were surprised to find this one sort of refreshing. But not so much refreshing because it's new, more so because it seems kinda classic. With Sunny and Abbott, it truly feels like they just said fuck it and did it because it was a funny idea. Both shows are set in Philly, both shows shoot in LA, and the joke of them crossing over had been circulating on the internet for some time.
It's a true crossover where the Sunny cast volunteers at Abbott to fulfill their court-ordered community service. The episode manages to pretty perfectly combine Dee and Charlie with the cast of Abbott while retaining the horrible nature of their characters. Frank is blended a little more sloppily into the episode, but still feels like what Frank Reynolds might do in a school during a Sunny episode, bringing alpha predator piss-soaked pelts to try to intimidate raccoons out of the school garden.
Dennis and Mac, however, aren't really utilized as characters at all. Dennis doesn't want to be on camera, and it's a pretty funny running bit, so he gets a pass. But you could replace Mac with anyone in this episode, and it would run exactly the same. Mac doesn't even really feel like himself, he's just kind of a guy in it.
Either way, this felt like a classic TV crossover from the 90s or 2000s.
There's also a continuation episode coming in the new season of Sunny, which is sure to lean more into their tone and style, so God, please don't bring the Abbott children anywhere near them. This is all for fun mostly, but is having fun at the core of crossovers? Was this a special form of artistic expression that was ruined by big business?
No.
No, it was never that.
No, it's never been that.
The start of superhero crossover comics in the 1940s was to sell comic books.
The start of the Universal Monster movie crossovers was to sell movie tickets by capitalizing on the success of the previous hits.
Most television crossovers from the 1980s to the 2020s were used as a way to intermix audiences of two shows on the same network or cable channel. Crossovers have always been, and probably will always be, two things. One big commercial for the two parts participating, and also something that can be quite collaborative and creative. Even though it advertises both parts, it presents a really interesting challenge.
A challenge that begins with the same idea, mashing two things together, but comes with wildly different solutions.
Usually the structure and challenges of writing the episode is informed not only by whether the shows share the same creator or network, but also what audiences feel about both shows. The genre can be equal parts fun and interesting, while also being a big cash grab.
It just sort of depends on who the creatives are working on it, just like anything made in the entertainment industry.
Wow, guys. That was great.
You've been here the whole time? We said you could go.
Yeah, I thought I'd just kind of hang out and listen, you know?
Fucking yoga ball gamer. Get out of here!
Go!
Okay, jeez.
Go on, get!
No, I don't believe it.
You will, Blinky. You will.